Welcome to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show. Here's your host, Alex Klausner.
Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show, where Dynasty never sleeps. I am your host, Alex Klausner. Today we are doing a very special bonus episode. I guess I shouldn't say very special because we are going to be doing this weekly, but it is a bonus episode we're going to be kind of doing over the course of the season. Every Wednesday, Thursday, kind of somewhere in that range, midweek. And we're going to be looking at what I like to call the hot seat index. So what this is going to be about is going to be about tracking basically the likelihood that an NFL coach is going to get fired. Now, while I think that there's kind of like maybe a question that we might have around why we would want to understand whether or not that's going to happen, I think that it's important as a dynasty owner to understand that just in the NFL and just in football in general, coaching matters. It's not just about the players on the field. It's also about the schemes. It's very much, let's say, when I was a reporter, like in 2011, covering the Florida Gator football team, I had the opportunity to sit in on a press conference with offensive coordinator at that time, Florida offensive coordinator Brian White. And one of the things that he said that I thought was just such a great term was, football is a game of violent chess. And I just think that's so true. Like, football really is about this chess match on the field. And you just have dudes that are just like launching themselves into each other based on what the chess game dictates to do. So the coaches basically set the players up to do what they're going to do. And they dictate so much of your fantasy success or failure based on how successful their schemes are at attacking a defense on a given week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the amount that coaches affect the game also affects your fantasy success, right? Like, we saw Jared Goff, for example, come into the league in 2016, and his first year, it looked like he was going to be a total bust under Jeff Fisher, a defensive head coach. When offensive guru Sean McVay shows up, all of a sudden Jared Goff becomes one of the top fantasy football quarterbacks and establishes some really high dynasty value during that time. Now, why this matters and tracking it over the course of the season is, as a dynasty owner, you've got to get ahead of these moves. You've got to understand that if a coaching change is going to happen, you've got to make changes to your team and your assets that are on these rosters based on kind of how that information is going to affect you. For example, you have a quarterback that's got a defensive head coach, suddenly new offensive coordinator comes in, or for example, they replace him with an offensive head coach. You are going to probably benefit in that situation. If it's vice versa, then maybe you want to think about selling that quarterback. So these are like some situations in where you want to be looking out for how these sea changes are going to affect you, because when a coaching staff turns over, it just wreaks havoc. I mean, you could have this receiver who's highly productive suddenly go into a scheme that he's a poor fit for, and suddenly he's not getting any targets, right? And you've got to sell that player. So these are some ways that can hurt you in Dynasty or help you in Dynasty, depending on how you play your cards. So what I'm going to be doing is kind of over the season, we're going to be tracking kind of the likelihood that a change is going to happen. And we're going to kind of dive into these scenarios and situations and see who's going to be successful, who's going to be unsuccessful, and we're going to have some fun doing it. And while it might seem like kind of weird that I say that we're going to have some fun talking about who's going to lose their job, just remember that coaching contracts are like guaranteed. So it's not like when you and I lose our job where we're out of a paycheck. It's like these guys get paid and then they can just go to Cabo because their contract is coming to them, whether they're coaching or not. So in some ways, like it's like, is it better to get fired? You know, you get paid to do nothing. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on. Okay, so we're gonna get into our top tier. Now, granted, the top tier that I have for this is like category 5. We'll call it 5 alarm fire, and that is this guy could get fired tomorrow. This guy, like probably like a mid-season change, but it is just week 1, so the likelihood that a change is going to happen mid-season probably pretty low. We're not going to have anyone in that category just yet. So we're going to move down to category 4, which is I call where there's smoke. So where there's smoke, there's fire, right? And so let's talk about that. Let's dive in. Our first coach on the list will be Robert Saleh from the New York Jets. I do think that there is an argument to put him in category 5 based off of what we saw on Monday night. The team got waxed. Granted, they are playing the 49ers, but you've got Aaron Rodgers there. And Aaron Rodgers played the whole game. He didn't just tear his Achilles, and you didn't have Zach Wilson go in. There aren't any excuses anymore. This New York Jets team has to put it together, and they have to deliver. And on that note, I just do not understand why Robert Saleh chose to keep offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett. I know that there's a deep relationship between him and Aaron Rodgers, but that was just a strange decision to me because Hackett has had so much trouble, and I do think that there is an element of, let's say the New York Jets have many more nights like Monday night, and they lose a lot of games. Well, the question is going to be like, why did you not replace your coordinator who pretty much everybody and their mother knows is just not really a great coach? Now, I mean, like, I'm not sitting here trying to take shots at Nathaniel Hackett like that. I know he knows a lot more about this game than I do. Like, I'm not acting like I'm going to be able to sit there and go into the NFL and call plays like him. But I am saying that relative to the performance of other NFL coaches, Nathaniel Hackett is not meeting that standard that you want him to meet when you have Aaron Rodgers and you have all of these expectations that the New York Jets have, making that investment in Rodgers and putting that team around him. Robert Saleh has to get it done, and he's not getting it done. So let's move on to our next guy, Doug Peterson. Now, Doug Peterson is in a really precarious position because his owner, Shad Khan of the Jacksonville Jaguars, just came out this offseason and said the expectation is playoffs. And when that happens, I mean, the mandate is there. And the fact that they just put this giant investment in quarterback Trevor Lawrence, basically, to me, while you might think that amounts to a vote of confidence in the coach, I think it's really just more a vote of confidence in the player. And it's really going to be on Doug Peterson to get the most out of Trevor and to be able to say, I molded Trevor into this MVP caliber quarterback and I got him to the playoffs. Because the Jacksonville Jaguars believe that Trevor Lawrence has the capability to do that. Now, right or wrong, right? Like, whether or not they're right in their evaluation of Trevor Lawrence, that's what they think he is. And they're going to make decisions on Doug Peterson and his job status based on that evaluation. So I think Doug Peterson has to make the playoffs to keep his job. The only situation where I could really see Doug Peterson keeping it is if Trevor Lawrence takes a huge step forward and they just barely miss the playoffs, like fluke touchdown in the deciding game, you know, and Doug Peterson can say, well, I know we didn't make the playoffs, but look at what I did with Trevor. I mean, right now, it's tough to say. Trevor does look like he's improved, but we'll see how it looks over the course of the season. Right now, they're 0-1, and that is not a good start for Doug. Okay, Now we're going to move on to a coach who won this week in New Orleans coach Dennis Allen. I thought Dennis was on one of the hottest seats in the league this season because there's just a perception around the league that Dennis is not really that strong of a head coach. And on top of that, you had the fact that like Jameis Winston basically like ran a mutiny on him on the goal line against the Falcons last year. So it's like, does his team respect him? You know, Derek Carr didn't really do him any favors last year. And so I do think that there's a real risk of Dennis Allen basically just being scapegoated for anything that goes wrong in New Orleans this year. Another thing about him is that relationship to Derek Carr. The organization made a huge investment in quarterback Derek Carr last season, and basically it's on Carr to get this team to the playoffs like they expect they can make, and it's really going to be on Dennis to help them get those results. Now, starting off 47-10 against the Carolina Panthers, I mean, yeah, that is going to definitely open some eyes, and the way that Derek Carr played, I do think is going to help Dennis Allen's case if they can keep putting together more games like that where they look that dominant. But you're not going to play the Panthers every week. And I think there's really just going to be a question of like, is New Orleans that good or is Carolina that bad? And we'll talk about Carolina head coach Dave Canales in a little bit. We're also going to get to another coach who is under a lot of pressure because of the quarterback, and that is Chicago head coach Matt Eberflus. I think that Eberflus made, I don't know what kind of case that game necessarily made for Eberflus, because on one hand, your defense, and like Eberflus is a defensive head coach, and and we saw this if you like go on Hard Knocks from this season and watch Hard Knocks, we saw Eberflus time and time again emphasizing turnovers. Like that was a huge thing for him. So it's like, with that emphasis on turnovers and that defensive background, and then you see the defense is really the thing that wins them the game. It was not the offense and Caleb Williams and what all the hype has been around. It was Matt Eberflus's defense that ultimately got them the dub, right? Now, you could say, okay, well, how much was that Tennessee just giving the game away? You know, how much has really changed? And there is the damning thing, which is that Caleb Williams really didn't do anything much better than Justin Fields had done. And while there's been so much hype and hope around Caleb Williams, there was a legitimate conversation in Chicago this offseason about, do you keep Justin Fields and just trade the rights to Caleb for another crazy pick haul? If Caleb Williams doesn't do better, then a lot of those people that were backing Justin Fields and criticizing the organization for kind of not really sticking with him may end up having more of a case. Right or wrong, you know, those voices are going to grow louder. And in general, it has to work with Caleb Williams. They've put because of, you know, that decision to send Justin Fields away, it has to work in Chicago. And if Caleb Williams keeps looking like that, there are just going to be significant questions around Eberflus and his handling of offense in general. Like, can you ever get an offense put together? You interviewed 11 coordinators, right? And so it's like, if Shane Waldron isn't the guy and he's not the right guy, the critiques are going to be loud. Moving right along, speaking of guys about whom critiques are loud right now, Brian Daboll from the New York Giants, who lost his game 28-6. This guy is on a major hot seat. Now, we can get into whether or not Daboll actually deserves to be on that hot seat, because I do think that there are cases you can make for him. Like, dude, this guy had Tommy DeVito, Tommy Cutlets, throwing 3 touchdowns in a game, in regular season play last year. This guy took Daniel Jones, who we are all seeing is really struggling to make himself worth his price tag. He took that guy to the wild card of the playoffs. And so there is a case like, yeah, Brian Daboll can really do some things. But at the same time, you did hitch your wagon to Daniel Jones. You are a part of the decision-making apparatus in New York that decided, yeah, this is a guy we can give that kind of money to. You are part of that decision-making apparatus that says, okay, yeah, let's let Saquon walk out the door. Those things are not sitting well with this fan base. Those things aren't sitting well with the owner. We saw on Hard Knocks, literally, John Mara sitting next to Giants general manager Joe Shane being like, man, I am not going to sleep well if Saquon Barkley ends up in Philadelphia. Well, he probably isn't getting a lot of sleep right now because Saquon Barkley is in Philadelphia and he is tearing it up, and Daniel Jones looks terrible. Terrible. I mean, whether or not, I'm not saying he is terrible. Sure looks like it, though. So, we have to now move on to another guy in the NFC East who was at a big risk for getting fired going into this season, and that is Philadelphia Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni, who is also on one of the hottest seats in the NFL, and it all has to do, I think, with the perception of the talent that is in Philly right now. Everyone is sitting there going, man, this talent is unbelievable. We've got Jalen Hurts, we've got Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and last year they started off without Saquon. They started, and with DeAndre Swift in the backfield, they started off 12-0. And then they just collapsed down the stretch. It was 12 or 11. I'm not sure, 12 or 11. One of those two. Double digits. They started on a double-digit win streak. And then just... So the collapse was so significant that there were legitimate talks of replacing Nick Sirianni in this offseason. And then heading into this offseason, we also see these stories coming out like Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni's relationship is like not that good. Jalen Hurts has a huge contract from the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, huge money that they have put into Jalen Hurts as their franchise quarterback. And Nick Sirianni's got to deliver. He's got to bring them to the playoffs because I'm going to be real with you. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I am saying that if Bill Belichick is going to get back into coaching, Philadelphia seems like a place where that could happen. So, just saying, possibly watch out for that. Now, we are going to move on to our next category. I'm not going to get into the situations necessarily behind all of these too in-depth the way that I just did with all of our Category 4 guys. This one is going to be Tier 3, which I call Disney World in July. Now, if you've ever been to Disney World in the month of July in Florida, that's a hot place. That's a scorcher. And so these are the coaches that I think find themselves in that category. Number 1, Mike Tomlin from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a very famously patient organization, but I do think that the patience is starting to run thin. The fan base has definitely always kind of been critical of Tomlin, but the ownership has stayed patient. The question is how long does that last? Okay, then I would say Sean McDermott from the Bills. You may want to just kind of keep an eye on McDermott. The reason being, I think last year, the way that he finished really saved him. But I think there was actually a pretty strong risk that he could have gotten fired last year. Things got really weird with his offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey. Getting Joe Brady to replace him That was a good move. That seems to have really kind of stabilized things and helped the offense out because I think they were running the ball a little bit more, and that really kind of got things moving in the right direction. But Buffalo always under McDermott seems to just have these heartbreaking losses. And you've got Josh Allen there. I just think that there's going to be questions that keep coming up, almost like Andy Reid when he had Donovan McNabb and he just could never win the big one. I think it's starting to get there where it's like, do we need to make a change because we've got the tools to get over the hump? We've got this great quarterback. We see our window. Can McDermott get us through to the promised land? That's the question I think you got to ask yourself there. Sean Payton in Denver. The Russell Wilson experiment was a disaster. And the way things went between Sean and Russ, I think, first of all, was not a good look for Sean Payton. The fact that his team had a game where they got 70 points hung up on them and looked like one of the worst teams in the NFL, that was not a good look for Sean Payton. The fact that Denver is paying him $20 million a year, that is an exorbitant coach contract. And these are the results. You know, the reputation this guy had walking in the door, I think, is really what's helping him right now. I do think the fact that he made the decision to get rid of Russell Wilson, take that big dead cap hit, convince the organization that that was the right call, and then they go to Bo Nix. Okay, cool, but that's got to work. While there are people who are very optimistic about Bo Nix, what we saw does not inspire a ton of confidence. And I do think that Sean Payton has to get the best out of Bo Nix that he can, or his time in Denver may not be very long. Okay, next up, Mike McCarthy. I do think Mike McCarthy's contract situation, where he's on a lame duck situation, where Dak's extended. You know, they've got contracts going out to a lot of people, but not Mike. Mike's got to deliver. He's got to get them at least to the NFC Championship, I think, or he loses his job. And again, now I know that this seems like such a strange pairing, and it's hard for me to even sit here and say it because it sounds so weird. But there has to be a part of Jerry Jones that's looking at it going, man, I'm not getting any younger. Bill Belichick's out there. That guy's got 6 rings. Maybe we need to bring him in. Maybe I need to put my ego aside if that guy can get me a ring, because how much time do I have left to get it? And I wonder how much that thought is going through Jerry Jones's mind right now. Because we all know he's got the money to go get it done. We all know he's got the clout to go get Bill Belichick if he wants to. Heck, this is the guy that got Bill Parcells to come to Dallas. That's Bill's guy. So, just saying, Mike McCarthy is on some shaky ground over there in Dallas. He's really got to deliver. I was even tempted to put him in the 4 category, but his team looks so good playing Cleveland. He might have made a real case for himself to stick around. So, just something to keep an eye on. I've got him in the 3s there. And then the last one here, Dave Canales from Carolina. Now, Dave just got hired this season. Okay, and that said, Dave Tepper is not a patient man. We have seen Dave Tepper, the owner of the Carolina Panthers, do some wild things. I mean, we saw him hire and fire a coach within like 6 games last season. So, whether or not this guy's a first-year hire, I traditionally do not put first-year hires really like high, even this high in this list in week 1. But I think just by the fact, because of the fact that you work for Dave Tepper and you're in charge of fixing Bryce Young, and then you go out there and you look like that, you're in some trouble. It doesn't matter that you were hired like yesterday. I think you're just in some trouble because the guy that you work for means you're in trouble. It just is. So that's what we're going to do. Just some guys that, we'll just say you want to keep an eye on as maybe not everything is going according to plan. So here are just some guys that may make an appearance on this podcast later this year. We're talking Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland there, Zach Taylor in Cincinnati, Gerard Mayo in New England. Now, I get it. He just won. Great. You are still replacing Bill Belichick in New England. We'll see how it goes. Okay, moving along. Then we also have Raheem Morris in Atlanta. Again, I know he was hired yesterday, but at the same time, that Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix situation is weird. And that happened under his watch. And the more that situation looks like it did with Kirk Cousins playing the way that he did, how much they're paying him, the Penix thing, this could get ugly. This could get ugly. It could get ugly fast. We'll see how it goes in Atlanta. The rest of you can consider yourself in the category 1 of hot, which I like to call Fonzie, because he's cool. Okay, so that does it for the Dynasty Fantasy Football Show, where Dynasty never sleeps. The Hot Seat Index, week 1 in the books. I appreciate you if you made it all the way to the end of this pod and you enjoyed talking about the coaches and their status with me and hanging out with that. Shoot me a line. Let me know what your thoughts are. Hit us up at Dynasty FF Show on all the social media. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Just remember, we're an independent pod, so any amount of support that you can offer is much appreciated. Signing off for today, I've been Alex Klausner. Until next time.